In our headlines on this Wednesday, September 3rd. The leaders of China, Russia and North Korea stand side by side in the Chinese capital city to mark Beijing's Victory Day parade earlier on this Wednesday in a symbolic show of solidarity. And North Korea's Kim Jong-un is accompanied by his daughter Kim Joo-ae in Beijing, renewing rampant speculation about a potential rise to power in the regime. Meanwhile, South Korea's gross domestic product spans 0.7% on quarter during the April to June period, driven by shipments overseas and spending at home. We start in Beijing, where Chinese President Xi Jinping hosted Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un to observe an elaborate show of might to mark the end of World War II. Our Shin Ha-young starts us off.
A military parade marking China's 80th Victory Day anniversary became the stage for the leaders of North Korea, China, and Russia to appear together for the first time in 66 years. The 70-minute-long celebration kicked off on Wednesday at 9 a.m. local time in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. About an hour before the official ceremony, around 25 world leaders began arriving at the venue, walking down a red carpet. Chinese President Xi Jinping greeted them, with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un entering just before Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was the last to arrive. Symbolic moments of solidarity among Pyongyang, Beijing, and Moscow continued throughout the event. With Xi in the center, Kim on his left, and Putin on his right, the three leaders walked up to the rostrum side by side, conversing with smiles. China marks September 3rd, 1945 as the day of its victory over Japan and the end of World War II. That's the day after Japan signed its unconditional surrender to China and the other allies.
History warns us that the destiny of humankind is closely interconnected. Only when nations and peoples treat each other as equals, live together in harmony, and support one another can we safeguard common security and eliminate the root causes of war. We must not allow the tragedies of history to repeat themselves.
During the military parade, China showcased strategic weapons for the first time, including the F-97 unmanned combat aircraft and the DF-61 intercontinental ballistic missile, reportedly an upgrade from the DF-41. A record 40,000 people took part in the parade, with 45 military units also marching through Tiananmen Square to display their strength. Meanwhile, from South Korea, National Assembly Speaker Woo Won-sik attended the parade. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
Now, as mentioned in that report, Kim Jong-un is in Beijing, and his presence alongside his Chinese host and Russian counterpart has been making headlines. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Seong covers this show of solidarity, as well as the implications of his daughter's presence in Beijing.
Attending China's Victory Day parade, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un appeared to assert North Korea's nuclear statehood, while signaling that his daughter is being groomed as his successor. On Wednesday, Kim appeared alongside Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Tiananmen Square. Amid geopolitical tensions, the gathering of leaders from the three sides was a display of unity last seen 66 years ago in the Cold War era.
It seems intended to demonstrate the strengthening of North Korea and China's socialist solidarity as a form of counterbalance to the South Korea-US-Japan trilateral framework. Another aspect for Chairman Kim is to show he plays a key role within the North Korea-China-Russia alignment.
Throughout the parade, the North Korean and Russian leaders constantly sat and stood on either side of Xi Jinping. For Kim Jong-un, the optics could portray North Korea as part of a trio of nuclear powers, as he continues to seek recognition of Pyongyang as a nuclear state. The occasion also marks Kim's first participation in a gathering of dozens of world leaders, a notable departure from the one-on-one summits that have defined this diplomacy so far. Russian outlet TASS reported that Kim and Putin would hold a bilateral summit on the sidelines.
Since the new treaty between North Korea and Russia, troop deployments for Moscow's war with Ukraine and compensation have been exchanged. If Kim meets Putin again during this 80th anniversary, it's possible they will discuss further compensation, possible the end of war negotiations, and various U.S.-North Korea issues.
However, with Beijing, Moscow and Pyongyang pursuing different strategic priorities, analysts believe a formal trilateral summit beyond a photo session is highly unlikely.
Before a summit takes place, the agenda, the accompanying officials, and their positions on how the international community will respond must be closely aligned. Yet, their coalition can be likened to being in the same bed with different dreams. Also, there hasn't been enough time for preparations in terms of the agenda and lineup.
Kim arrived in Beijing on Tuesday by special train in his first visit in 6 years. What was more striking upon arrival was the unexpected appearance of Kim's daughter Kim Joo-ae. She was seen standing directly behind her father as he was greeted by high-level Chinese officials.
When Kim Jong-un turned 8 years old, his father tapped him as his successor. However, as he was not given sufficient diplomatic training, he remained a leader of an isolated state until he participated in the summits with China, South Korea, and the United States in 2018. Determined not to pass down this unfortunate experience to his daughter, Kim Jong-un seems to have brought her to China, firmly resolved to introduce her early onto the diplomatic stage and provide her with systematic training.
The implications for inter-Korean and US-North Korea diplomacy remain uncertain. Observers say Kim might consult Xi about a potential summit with US President Donald Trump. Still, Seoul officials have cautioned against premature optimism, saying that Pyongyang has shown no signs of abandoning its nuclear program. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump took to his social media platform to share his thoughts on the high-profile gathering in the Chinese capital city. Here's our Yoon-jin.
U.S. President Donald Trump took to social media to respond to a show of solidarity between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Chinese leader Xi Jinping during the 80th anniversary Victory Day parade in Beijing on Wednesday morning. In his post, Trump said the U.S. had given, quote, a massive amount of support and blood to China to help it secure its freedom, while also pondering whether Xi would mention that in the meeting. Trump signed off by sending his warmest regards to Putin and Kim as they, quote, conspire against the United States. President Trump has dismissed any concerns over the close ties being showcased by Russia, China, and North Korea. Trump told reporters in the Oval Office on Tuesday that he had a good relationship with President Xi and that China, quote, needs us more than we need them, rejecting suggestions that the three-way unity between Putin, Xi, and Kim would pose any challenge. Separately, Trump told the Scott Jennings radio show that America has, quote, the most powerful military forces in the world, and that military forces would not be used against the U.S. Meanwhile, President Trump on Tuesday also dismissed rumors concerning his health, after rumors swirled on social media when Trump hadn't been seen publicly since his cabinet meeting last Wednesday and had a clear weekend schedule. When asked by a reporter, Trump said he was busy over the Labor Day weekend, giving media interviews and visiting his Virginia golf course, calling the speculation fake news, stating that he was very active.
Now, you knew I did an interview that lasted for about an hour and a half with somebody, and everybody saw that was on one of your competitors. I did numerous shows and also did a number of truths, long truths, and I think pretty poignant truths. No, I was very active over the weekend.
The White House has said Trump was diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency, which is a fairly common condition for older adults. And as for the bruising on his hand, the press secretary said it's from frequent handshaking and the use of aspirin, which Trump takes regularly to reduce the risk of heart attacks and strokes. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has vowed support for small and medium-sized manufacturers, highlighting the essential role of the industry as a whole for economic growth. To take a listen.
제조업들이 고용에 있어서 매우 큰 역할을 하고 있기 때문에 우리 강소기업들 또 역량 있는 제조업들이 성장 발전해야 되는데 우리 정부로서도 매우 관심을 많이 가지고 있고 또 지원할 수 있도록 노력하고 있습니다.
Speaking at a semiconductor equipment manufacturing company in the city of Ansan on this Wednesday, he also noted that South Korea faces the dual task of recovery and growth and promised rapid recovery to enhance livelihoods. And as we reported back on Tuesday, President Jae-myung will become the first South Korean leader to preside over a United Nations Security Council meeting as South Korea assumes the presidency of the 15-member body this month. Seoul's foreign ministry says the president will chair an open debate on Wednesday, September 24th in New York on the implications of AI on peace and stability. Ahead of this event on September 9th, Seoul will convene a separate debate on UN peace operations, as this month the council also deliberates on the conflicts in the Middle East. Seoul plans to further highlight women, peace and security, as well as the link between climate and conflict. In other news, the South Korean economy expanded 0.7% on quarter in the second quarter of this year, higher than previous projections. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young reports.
South Korea's economy grew faster than earlier estimated in the second quarter, driven by robust exports and improved private consumption. Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Wednesday revealed that the nation's real gross domestic product, a key economic indicator, grew by 0.7% quarter-on-quarter in the April to June period this year. This revised figure marks an improvement of 0.1 percentage point from the advanced estimate made in July. The growth also represents a significant rebound from a contraction experienced in the first quarter. Last week, the central bank upgraded its economic growth forecast for this year to 0.9%, up from its previous projection of 0.8%.
If the economy grows around 0.6% on quarter in the second half, we will be able to achieve 0.9% annual growth.
Breaking down the growth drivers, private spending saw a 0.5% increase, largely due to higher spending on automobiles and health services. Government expenditure also climbed 1.2%, boosted by increased healthcare benefits. However, construction investment contracted, primarily driven by a decrease in civil engineering projects. Facilities investment also declined due to reduced demand for ships and semiconductor manufacturing equipment. In terms of trade, exports surged by 4.5%, spurred by strong global demand for semiconductors and petroleum and chemical products. Imports were also up by 4.2%.
We expect domestic demand to continue its modest recovery, led by the government's supplementary budget execution and better consumer sentiment. However, while exports showed a favorable trend in July and August, we anticipate growth to gradually slow as the impact of U.S. tariff impositions expands.
Meanwhile, the country's gross national income saw a 2% increase, with real GNI growing by 1%. This was largely due to improved terms of trade, which led to a reduction in real trade losses. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
And the Lee Jae-myung administration has announced a framework of financial assistance to aid exporters seeking to navigate higher U.S. tariffs. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has details.
The South Korean government is expanding its financial support to companies hit by U.S. tariffs. At an economic ministerial meeting on Wednesday, officials announced a comprehensive support package for these companies, including 13.6 trillion won, or about 10 billion US dollars in emergency management funds. A record 270 trillion won, or $193 billion in trade insurance and credit, will also be available to support exporters.
The real race toward economic recovery starts now. The government will sprint without rest. We will respond flawlessly to global trade risks, while mobilizing all policy capabilities to push forward with projects to lead the AI and super innovation economy.
In next year's budget proposal, trade issues and export support has been increased to 4.3 trillion won, or just over $3 billion. For sectors affected by tariffs, interest rates on operation funds will be cut further and lending limits will be raised tenfold. Hard-hit industries like steel and aluminum will receive specialized support, including 570 billion won, or just over $400 million in dedicated financing and emergency allocated tariffs on core raw materials. The Industry Ministry will spearhead the government's on-the-ground response, coordinating across 12 ministries.
Today, we have prepared tangible support measures with 12 ministries based on 3 principles. First, mobilizing all available policy tools. Second, an all-out, whole of government response. And third, a focus on the needs of companies.
This support is critical for the nation's small and medium-sized enterprises as well. A recent government survey found that nearly 63% of these companies expect the tariffs to negatively impact their exports.
Export-oriented SMEs expressed strong on-the-ground need for support with logistics costs, policy funds, detailed information, and export market diversification. Reflecting these voices, we have prepared support measures for SMEs in response to the U.S. reciprocal tariffs.
Meanwhile, with the Chuseok holiday approaching, the government also announced plans to ease the burden on households. The Deputy Prime Minister stated that Chuseok livelihood stability measures will be announced soon. Additionally, a second round of livelihood recovery consumption coupons will be distributed starting from September 22nd. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On the political front, Won Min-kyung, the second nominee for Minister of Gender Equality and Family under the Lee Jae-myung administration, faced a confirmation hearing on this Wednesday. In her testimony today, she pledged to address the gender wage gap and gender-based violence. Won's nomination follows the withdrawal of the previous candidate Kang Sun-woo, who stepped down following rampant allegations of workplace abuse. Seoul Fashion Week is back, and the catwalk this time around has been extended across the capital city. Our Park Hyo-bin had a glimpse.
Fashion, stars, and a runway by the palace walls. Seoul Fashion Week is back for its 2026 spring-summer season, offering a glimpse of the trends that will shape styles in the coming year. Marking its 25th anniversary, this year's event goes beyond the traditional venue at Dongdaemun Design Plaza, spreading across the entire city of Seoul. And the week began right here along the stone walls of Deoksugung Palace with a striking opening show by Anderson Bell.
I've always followed Anderson Bell, and since the show is held here along the Deoksugung Palace walls, I was really excited to come.
I've been attending the event for about 3 or 4 years now. I didn't want to miss it this time either. The runway today is what I'm looking forward to most, especially because it's a brand I've always liked.
Before the runway began, the area around the palace was already filled with stars and fans alike. On the photo wall, big names like Tomorrow by Together's Hyunin Kai, Hearts to Hearts Ian and Tsiu, and IVE's Gaeul drew the crowds. Once the opening runway show kicked off, Anderson Bell unveiled its 2026 spring-summer collection under the theme Surfed Clash. The pieces highlighted unexpected color matches, layered silhouettes that looked effortless yet calculated, and deconstructed details with a worn-in edge. And Deoksugung Palace is not the only iconic location to serve as a backdrop. Throughout the week, 27 Korean designer brands take turns presenting their collections at Seoul landmarks, including the Oil Tank Culture Park, Heungcheonsa Temple, and of course, Dongdaemun Design Plaza. Adding a global touch, Berlin Fashion Week also joined Seoul Fashion Week for the first time, showcasing its official Berlin showroom.
The event runs until this Sunday, turning Seoul into a global fashion city. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
And a world-renowned exhibition platform has opened its first Asian showcase right here in Seoul. Our Pyun Ye-young was there.
Design Miami has landed in Asia for the very first time, opening its Seoul edition to shine a spotlight on Korean designers who have long played a role in connecting the nation's culture with the world. Titled Illuminated, a spotlight on Korean design, the exhibition is Design Miami's first in situ endeavor. From stunning glass decorative pieces to traditional Korean accessories made from cow intestines, the exhibition shows Korean designers who have become renowned names in global design spheres.
Design Miami is a globally renowned exhibition platform. By hosting such a prestigious design platform here in Seoul, the first in Asia, we wanted to create an opportunity for our city to expand and step onto the world stage through design.
Design Miami in Situ showcases over 170 pieces by 71 artists. From traditional crafts to contemporary concepts, every piece highlights the creativity of Korean design.
Among the standout works are pieces deeply rooted in Korea's culture and traditions. Pagwamin's bench, made from a massive stone slab, evokes a surreal, dreamlike effect. Lee Jong-un reinterprets hanji, traditional Korean paper, by applying it to wooden lattice frames, transforming the technique into a sculptural paper sofa. This particular piece was also a finalist for the prestigious Loewe Foundation Craft Prize. The venue itself adds another layer of meaning. Dongdaemun Design Plaza, or DDP, is a cultural landmark in Seoul and home to many artistic events like Seoul Fashion Week. DDP was designed by the late architect Zaha Hadid, Design Miami's very first designer of the year back in 2005, so the choice of the venue brings Design Miami's story full circle.
Korean culture is making waves on the global stage right now. Likewise, through this Design Miami Seoul exhibition, we hope to introduce many people to Korean design and design art. The exhibition is open free of charge, so we encourage the public to come and experience the works of these renowned designers firsthand.
Alongside the exhibition, Design Miami also hosted design talks on Tuesday to foster dialogue on Korean design. Design Miami Seoul runs through September 14th, 2025 at Dongdaemun Design Plaza. Hyunyeong, Arirang News.
Netflix sensation KPop Demon Hunters has become the most watched title on the platform, according to the streaming service. The animation has been streamed over 266 million times, making it the top content of all time on Netflix. In fact, it has surpassed Squid Game Season 1, which previously held the top spot in the show category. Meanwhile, its original soundtrack, Golden, continues to dominate the US Billboard Hot 100 chart, holding the #1 spot for the third straight week.
The night heat has eased off as we enter September, but the sun shines strongly in the middle of the day. Heat wave advisors are still in place in the southern parts of the country and Jeju Island today. The temperatures rose further in the western regions under the influence of the easterly wind. On the other side of the country, the east coast stayed relatively cooler at below 30 degrees Celsius. Until tonight, showers will pass throughout the southern parts of Gyeonggi-do province and southern parts of the Chungcheong-do provinces. The expected precipitation is as little as 5 millimeters to as much as 60 millimeters. There will be rain in the central regions and showers in the south tomorrow. Tomorrow, Seoul, Daejeon, Gwangju, and Daegu will start off at 24 degrees. Highs will only rise to 29 degrees in Seoul and Gyeongju, Chuncheon 27 degrees. Frequent showers are expected this week, and rain is forecast again on Saturday afternoon. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon the local economy. Thank you for now.
a well-known company in the field of road safety facility manufacturing. We operate the factory nationwide in Korea. To go beyond the demanding safety standards of the ages, we are Global Network, local, worldwide, the global small and strong company appointed by Korean government. We are KSI.
인식 시작합니다.
헤이미라, 오늘의 운동 루틴 시작해줘.
네, 오늘의 운동 루틴을 시작하겠습니다. 레디, 고! 좀 더 앉아 보아요. 4, 3, 2, 1. 고생했어요.
We move. Annually, we invest more than 10% of our total revenues in research and development and 15% in the R&D workforce. Main products, pneumatic cylinders, solenoid valves, hydraulic cylinders, air preparation units, and grippers, and all other products are manufactured through systematic management. KCC Precision.
South Korea's exports expand 1.3% on year in August. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the latest regarding the South Korean economy. Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's September 3rd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Now, economy has been at the center of the Lee Jae-myung administration's national agenda thus far this week. For more on this, I have Lee Ji-hoon with Reuters here in the studio. Ji-hoon, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
I also have Professor Yang Hee-dong at Ewha Women's University live on the line. Professor Yang, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Right, Ji-hoon, we will start here in the studio. Let's begin with your coverage for Reuters about South Korea's exports for the month of August.
Sure, yeah, data showed this week exports in August rose for the third straight month, but the growth rate slowed to the weakest in 3 months to 1.3% from 5.8% in July. It was slower than market expectations of 3.0% expected in our survey. By product, semiconductors rose 27% as demand remains strong for AI technologies. Car exports also rose 8.6% thanks to strong demand for electric vehicles in Europe. However, by destination, there were signs the impact of U.S. tariffs was weighing on South Korea's exports. Shipments to the U.S. fell 12%, which was the biggest drop since May 2020, when global supply chains were disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The decline was led by cars and steel products, which are subject to high tariffs of 25% and 50% under Trump's tariff policy. Still, exports rose in semiconductors and wireless communication devices because they are currently exempt from Trump's tariffs. Economists said the decline in U.S. exports was even sharper last month due to the effect of front-loading before Trump's higher tariffs kicked in early August. And economists say U.S. exports will likely continue to fall throughout this year because of the impact of U.S. tariffs. But the pace of decline might be softer going forward because the 15% tariff on South Korea the U.S. has imposed is on par with those on Japan and the European Union, which are rival exporters.
Right. In the time being, though, Professor Yang, with regard to last month's exports, Bloomberg says South Korea's exports stayed solid, while the Wall Street Journal says exports slowed. How do you assess South Korea's exports for the month of August?
Well, it's really up to where you focus on. The Bloomberg emphasized on the growth rate of the sectoral export. For example, the semiconductors, as report already mentioned, semiconductors increased by 27% due to strong AI demand, and automobiles increased by 9%, particularly with the focus on the many different areas. So the Bloomberg, has the titles of very solid growth, whereas Wall Street Journal has a focus on some deteriorate export growth rate in August compared to July. So in July, we had about 5.8% the annual growth, whereas the annual growth in August, they slumped down to 1.3%. So it's really up to where your, the focus is located now. And in person, I should say that our export performance will be pretty much mixed up to the different regions, because Korea has experienced a very weak Korean currency. So the exchange rate is increased pretty high, over 1,400 won compared to per dollar. But we have suffered a lot from this reciprocal tariff. So we have to conduct some kind of sensitivity analysis between the increased tariff amount versus the weakened Korean currency. In the U.S. market, unfortunately, this tariff increase has overrode, right, the very positive phenomena of the weak Korean currency. But in the other regions, Korean export companies can enjoy a lot from the weakened Korean currency. So the impact of all these, global geographical and geological, the trade issues, will depend on about the international trade policies pertaining to the United States reciprocal tariff, and etc. So I should say that the impact on the current export really depend on different regions, particularly their trade policy.
Right. Staying with that, Professor Yang, as Chiun mentioned earlier, findings for August show that South Korean exports to the US and China slumped, while its exports to Southeast Asia soared. Could export markets and product diversification help to offset the impact of US tariffs, do you think?
Absolutely. The Minister of International Trade and the Raw Materials, Kim Jong-un, mentioned that we need to take care of three aspects to deal with this high reciprocal tariff. The first one is we need to encourage our companies to increase their domestic sales due to dilute the bad impact from reciprocal tariff. And second one is our company need to diversify their export market. And the third one is our company needs to strengthen their core competency. So absolutely, the market diversification is included as one of three major counter strategies of our export companies in dealing with the strong reciprocal tariff from the United States. So there's no doubt for that. The number one export market is China. Number two is the United States. Now, the Southeastern market, South Asian countries have emerged as the third export market for our companies. So we need to push up the export to those emerging markets in Southern Asia, and also we need to explore new markets in Middle East and Africa, etc. So it's the right time to diversify our export strategies and increase our direct investment in those less developed countries, whereas we may have to develop a very different strategies in dealing with our market for the United States.
Right. And speaking about the United States, Chi-hoon, do tell us a bit about the concerns raised by the central bank here with regard to the impact of 15% U.S. tariffs on South Korean products.
Yeah, last week, the Bank of Korea held interest rates steady for the second consecutive meeting due to worries about household debt, but it also signaled that there will be imminent interest rate cuts, with 5 of 6 board members saying they are open to lowering interest rates in the next 3 months. At the meeting, the Bank of Korea slightly raised its economic growth forecast for this year to 0.9% from 0.8%, reflecting the government's stimulus measures. But that is still the lowest since 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the global economy. And the central bank also said there will be a significant economic shock from U.S. tariffs even after the trade deal. The tariff deal between South Korea and the United States avoided a higher 25% tariffs threatened by President Trump, but that is still higher than the 15% tariff is still higher than the 10% baseline tariff that had been in place, and almost zero tariffs South Korea had enjoyed under a free trade agreement. Considering the free trade agreement, the Bank of Korea said U.S. tariffs on South Korea rose more than other exporting rivals such as Japan and the European Union. And to be specific, South Korea was granted a tariff cut that is the 9th largest among 50 major exporting countries, compared with Trump's tariff announcement in early April. Still, compared with before Trump's tariff policy, South Korea faces tariff hike that is higher than more than half of the 50 countries. And because South Korea is one of the top exporters of steel products to the United States, which is subject to 50% tariffs, the Bank of Korea says Trump's tariff policy is having a larger impact on South Korea than other exporting countries.
Right. Jiun, as part of efforts, therefore, to bolster growth, the Lee Jae-myung administration has shared a budget proposal that surpasses 700 trillion won for the first time. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular proposal and its objectives?
Yeah, last week, as the Bank of Korea held a policy meeting, the government of President Lee Jae-myung also announced its first budget plan for the administration. President Lee has pledged expansionary fiscal policy since his election campaign. And next year, the government plans to raise its budget spending by 8.1%. That will be the biggest increase since 2022, after 3 years of the former conservative administration, which prioritized fiscal sustainability. The policy focus will be on AI investment, which the government sees as a key area of focus to boost economic growth in the long term amid the falling potential growth rates. The government said it will raise spending on research by 19%, which is the biggest on record, with a focus on AI to make South Korea a top 3 AI power, along with the United States and China. In other areas, spending on social welfare will be raised by 8%, with more projects to boost falling birth rates, which is already lowest in the world. Spending on industrial policies will be raised by 15% to support tariff-hit exporters, and spending on cultural policies will also be raised by 9% because President Lee has prioritized his policy to make South Korea a global cultural power. There also has been pressure from the Trump administration to raise defense spending, and as a result, they will be raised by 8% to make it equivalent to 2.4% of GDP.
Right. Professor Yang, speaking as a scholar, what can you tell us about the risks and rewards of an expansionary fiscal policy?
Well, the expansionary fiscal policy means governments want to spend more, right, to cover up all of their promised expenditures. So the positive aspect of this very proactive posture is now the government take a very strong initiative to promote and invest for the future-oriented, the industry, such as AI, semiconductors, biotech, or whatever. But these days, lots of very pessimistic and concerned opinions about this policy. The first one is inflation. The United States has suffered a lot from this kind of very proactive fiscal policies during COVID-19, and that is one of the major reasons why the Biden has lost his, had to step down and being defeated by Donald Trump. And number one is the risk is crowding out of private investment. So somehow, the very proactive public investment may kick out the investment from the private sectors. Why does it matter? Because public investment all the time taking a very short perspective, short timeline, and all of a sudden they lose control over the qualities of the poor project management. So those are very significant and the risks of public investment. And in Korea, we already have suffered a lot from over $700 billion of investment in AI data gathering. So the Korean government has spent a lot of money and a lot of years to collect a lot of data to support AI, as infrastructures for this industry, but more than half of the projects end up with a failure. All those data sets are not being used at all. So that is a good example of a very poor management of public investment. And also, if the government increase their budget, somehow they cannot stand against very strong demand from private and the citizen sectors. So they may have to divert their expenses toward like welfare sectors, the pensions and employment benefits, etc. So already government have spent a lot of money on this sectors, and this government has taken up very private and the citizen the side. And that is another concern for the very proactive the fiscal policies. So there is no single solution whether the proactive fiscal policy is good or not, but it's really up to the context, orientation of the current the government.
Right. In the meantime, though, Jong-un, some have flagged the growing debt to GDP ratio amid the expansion in spending. Could you tell us a bit more about the numbers there?
Yeah, under the expansionary fiscal policy stance, South Korea's fiscal deficit is projected to widen to 4% of GDP next year, which is sharply up from 2.8% projected for this year. Debt to GDP ratio will surpass 50% next year to an estimated 51.6%, compared with 48.1% this year. After the sharp increase next year, the government said it will slow expenditure growth to keep it at an annual average of 5.5% for the next 5 months. And under that pace, the debt to GDP ratio is expected to rise to 58% by 2029, which is 10 percentage points higher than where it stands now.
Right. Professor Yang, simply speaking then, what is the debt to GDP ratio, and should we be concerned about the rise in South Korea's debt to GDP ratio?
Yeah, well, the debt to GDP ratio means the ratio of countries' accumulation of government debt to its GDP. So a low debt to GDP ratio means an economy produces goods and services sufficient to pay back debts without incurring further debt. Well, as the reporter mentioned, this ratio has increased very sharply, and the highest in our country's history. And now, debt to GDP ratio amounts to about 51.6%, which is the highest in our history. And fiscal deficit, which is a difference between fiscal revenue and fiscal expenses, amount to 4.2% of GDP. I mean, this ratio is far above the government announced the threshold of 3%. And why is it bad? Because it only impacts on the long-term fiscal sustainability. If the government suffers this very, the high debt to GDP ratio, then government credibility will be deteriorated. That means if the government want to sell their country bond, they may have to promise to pay higher interests, meaning the more burdens for the pay to the owners of the government, the bonds with the higher expenses. So absolutely, every country is really concerned about the levels of debt to GDP ratio. Well, as we mentioned, the Bloomberg and many other journalists have very pessimistic opinions about the future, right, in terms of debt to GDP ratio. So Bloomberg mentioned that our debt to GDP ratio amount to 70% in 5 years, and it will reach about 100% by 2045. Well, because the population is decreased, and we spend a lot of money for welfare. So all these issues, meaning we will have far less fiscal revenues with more expenses from the government pocket. So even in this year, in April, the Fitch rating mentioned Korea's public finance are no longer a credit strengths. So that means we need to reflect all these changes in our demographics and welfare expenses into our tax and government revenue, the reforms. So we have to make some changes in the government income and expenses structures.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Chiyun, we have some time left, so let's quickly touch upon South Korea's consumer prices, which I understand dropped to a 9-month low last month. Could you tell us a bit more about this finding and its implications?
Yeah, consumer inflation slowed to 1.7% in August from 2.1% in July, which was the lowest in 9 months. It was much weaker than a 2.0% forecast in our survey, but it was not really a surprise for market participants because it was mainly due to a temporary factor of a drop in telecommunication prices. Last month, SK Telecom, which is the biggest with 24 million customers, provide a 50% discount in monthly fees to all of its customers to apologize for its data leak earlier this year. As a result, core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, slowed to 1.3%, which was the lowest in nearly 4 years. However, economists say it is unlikely to have a meaningful implication for monetary policy because the Bank of Korea said after the data was released that inflation is expected to rebound to 2% in September and remain there for some time being, which is around the Bank of Korea's midterm policy target of 2%.
Well, that would be 2% for then throughout the year.
Yeah.
I see. All right, well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have then. Chiyun, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Professor Young, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow, so do join us then, and thank you for now.
천년을 이어온 우리의 지혜가 제천에서 다시 태어났어. 세대를 관통한 선조들의 건강 빅데이터. 빅데이터. 우리의 삶과 들에서 자란 천연물은 단순한 재료